Have you ever wondered if objects could speak? What secrets they would reveal? What truths they've witnessed? I am not just steel. I am a sword forged in fire, bathed in blood, carried by kings, thieves, and warriors across centuries. I have seen empires rise and fall, felt betrayal and glory, slept in darkness, and glittered in the hands of men who mistook me for power. Tonight, I will tell you my story. I remember the first breath of heat, the opening of the furnace like a red dawn. The smith's hands were cracked with labor and black with old ash. He did not speak much. He sang with the hammer. Each strike cut a new syllable into me. Iron answered iron. Sparks leapt like swarms of golden bees. He folded me again and again, as if he were teaching a stubborn child to kneel, teaching memory to take a shape. He worked through the night while the village slept, pausing only to drink water that tasted of smoke. When he quenched me, the world hissed into silence. I learned then that even fire bows to water, and steel remembers both masters. He did not know he was making a witness. He thought he was making a weapon. My first master was not yet a king when he strapped me to his side. He was young and hungry, a prince who rose before the sun and oiled his armor in the light of a single candle. He held me with gentleness at first, whispering a prayer to saints he half believed in. But he learned the quick language of war, and I learned the weight of a man's life. We rode out under a sky the color of wet wool. The fields were high with summer grain, and the horses snorted clouds. Trumpets split the morning. The world tilted. Then it began the crowding of bodies, the urgent nearness of breath, the thud of hooves, the screaming joy and terror of collision. I cut because that is what I was asked to do, and because the hand that gripped me would not be denied. Armor rang like bells, then split like ripe fruit. Blood has a sound. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. It does not scream. It murmurs like a spill of wine. It patters like rain across a table of bones. It hushes the field the way snow hushes a forest. My master called out the names of men he had trained with and men he would never see again. He prayed between blows with a voice that broke like a boy's. He triumphed. And for a little while he believed he triumphed because of me. What is a crowned head but a head that has not yet fallen? The spear that found him came from a farmer's son who had never left his village. It slid through a seam in the prince's breastplate with the obscene ease of a key in a familiar lock. He sagged forward against the spear shaft, as if exhausted from the long day, and I slipped from his hand into the mud, choked with crushed grass and men's breath. I watched the sky turn the color of overripe plums. The young king, that is what they called him later, died without a kingdom. I lay beside him, streaked with his blood, listening to flies discover their banquet. When the looting began, feet thumped around me. A man whose courage grew only when the trumpet stopped picked me up. He was a scavenger in a leather coat that had once been handsome and was now only greasy. He loved the look of me, the shine peeking through mud, the promise of danger without the cost of honor. He used me poorly. He killed men who ran and men who begged, and he sold trinkets he wrenched from the dead. He laughed with his mouth open, so wide I could see the black pit where a molar had rotted away. He did not sharpen me. He did not clean me. He gambled with me as collateral and won back the same coin he had once stolen. When they finally caught him, for thieves always gather their own noose, he tried to barter me for his neck. Men in drab wool shook their heads. Necklaces of rope are very cheap. They left me in a ditch with a pair of boots and a cousin of the prince who had ridden too far into enemy laughter. Rain found me. Rust said my name in a soft, patient voice. But iron has a will, and so did the world. A monk gathering usable scraps for the abbey's kitchen found my hilt and hauled me from the ditch, as if he were pulling a sin out of his own heart. He brought me to a knight with a serious mouth and eyes that drank the horizon. The knight did not smile when he first held me. He weighed me in his palm and nodded, the way a mason nods to the stone he must raise. He took me to a smith who filed away the ditch's months and woke my edge from sleep. I learned prayers in Latin, but the Latin was spoken over flames and saddle leather, not over gold. We crossed seas. We kissed foreign dust. There are places where the sun is a white coin you can hurt your eyes with, and stones glare like angry brothers. There, under banners painted with crosses, men insisted they were merchants of God. They sold redemption at the point of steel and bought land with other men's ancestors. I will not say those years were only cruelty. I saw mercy between enemies who happened to be alone. I saw water given to a dying man whose tongue had cracked like clay. But I also heard the music of cities burning, and it is a terrible music. Doors sing and roofs drum, and the wind plays through the alleys like a piper no one dares to see. When the knight died many years later, in a tent that smelled of oil and fever, he tried to give me to his son. The boy's hand shook. He did not want my memories. He traded me to a merchant with soft shoes and sharp knuckles. So I drifted, braided into the caravan speech, wrapped in cloth, passed from one tongue to another like a proverb. Once, in a port city where cormorants stitched the sky with their black needle wings, a sailor paid for me with a ring and a story. The story was about a storm that swallowed his brother whole and spat back his boots without laces. He kept the boots. He sold the ring. He kept me for a voyage, and then for a second one. And by the time we reached the islands, where the trees leaned like listening men, he sold me to a trader, who sold me to another trader, who spoke of a land where swords curved like moon slices and men bowed to each other before they cut. I came at last into the hands of a warrior who was not of my birth, but understood me nonetheless. He was not like my first master. Honor to him was not a crown but a line drawn daily with a brush and with blood. He examined me in an autumn garden while a wind worried at the sleeves of his robe. He ran his thumb very lightly along my edge and nodded. He did not try to turn me into a moon slice. He let me be a foreigner. He carried me alongside a blade shaped by his own land's patience, and he treated us as brothers. Duels are not always loud. Sometimes they are the careful unfolding of a letter. My new master faced a man whose smile had no warmth in it, and whose sword was lovely as frost. They bowed. They breathed. They moved. I felt the grace of it even as I remembered fields where grace had been trampled. My master won, but victory called its old price, and it was not long before a friend's doorway opened onto betrayal. The blow that killed him came from the left, from behind a paper wall. His blood came first as a surprise, then as an ocean. He fell among the scattered brushes of his writing desk. A poem he had been composing about the sound of rain in a lantern was stained brown, then darker. The traitor took me and tried to use me as his proof that victory granted inheritance. The house disagreed. He fled, and I fled with him, because that is what a hand makes a blade do. Years grew on me the way lichen grows on old stones. I spent some of them in a trunk. I spent others on a wall above a hearth, where children told each other that I could drink a man's shadow if I were thirsty. Eventually, I was strange again in a different way, for I crossed into a century that lit itself with electricity and then used that light to find more efficient night. A soldier, a small, ordinary man with ropey wrists found me while digging a foxhole that kept caving in. He was from a place where winter blows its nose against your window like a rude uncle. The Soviet Union, they called it in the papers, though he called it simply home. He did not raise me above his head and shout. He cleaned me with a rag that had once been a skirt. He slid me under his coat. At night he pulled me out and looked into me as if I were a pool of water that might show him a better world behind his own face. He told me about a girl who sold sunflower seeds by the station. He told me about his mother who kept potatoes in a box so they wouldn't learn how to freeze. He told me about a teacher who had called him a good boy and meant it. He spoke in a low voice so the officers would not write his voice down in their books. Once, during a lull that smelled of damp wool and cheap tobacco, he used me to cut a strap that had snarled itself around a comrade's ankle. Once, during a chaos that smelled of diesel and fear, he used me to threaten a man who wanted to take his boots. He never asked me to drink. Not once. When the war ended, he took me home and wrapped me in paper that had a faint print of dancing bears. He hid me in the back of a wardrobe behind a blanket that had known many winters. He would take me out on evenings when someone played a sad song on a wooden radio. He would hold me for a minute, and then he would put me away again, as if I were a photograph that both warms and wounds. Time is a solvent. It took his hair, then his teeth, then his hands' quickness. It did not take his love for his small kitchen, where steam made lace on the eye window. When he died, the apartment became a new kind of battlefield. Relatives, neighbors, officials, all with papers. The wardrobe was emptied. The bare paper crinkled. I blinked in the sudden light. A grandson with a gambler's jaw sold me to a man who didn't ask too many questions. The man who didn't ask too many questions folded me under the false bottom of a suitcase and rode a train that smelled of metal and last night's soup. At a border he smiled, the way a professional smiles, wide enough to be friendly, not wide enough to show his throat. Documents were stamped, and with each stamp the past grew, fuzzier and more valuable. The market where I next woke was not a market. It was a whisper arranged in a room. There were paintings on the walls whose provenance was a sonnet of half-truths. There were coins that had slept under kings' tongues. There were small statues that had been found in middens of history that were still warm. Men and women who knew the price of silence touched me as if I might confess. I did not confess. I do not speak in those rooms. I let men think they are listening. The man who bought me had a name, with too many consonants to be old money, and too much calm to be new. In England, his house pretended to be older than it was. Ivy held hands with brick. Gravel made the correct mutter under expensive tires. The lawn rehearsed its lines and hid its marks. A gallery the size of a chapel waited for me. He had a curator for his collection and a cleaner for his soul. He hung me opposite a painting of a ship caught in a violent sea. The ship had been fighting that storm for 150 years. I admired its stamina. He would bring guests in and tell a story about me that began with a real place and ended with a real price. He loved watching their minds do arithmetic, but the best performances are not offered to audiences. They are saved for the quiet after. At night he walked the gallery alone, barefoot on the cold floor, a tumbler of something brown in his hand, his phone glowing like a small moon. He made calls. He whispered names. He laughed without showing his teeth. He bought things that weren't for sale and sold things that didn't belong to him. He promised a minister that a problem would go away the way snow goes away if you are patient. He promised a rival that certain photographs would remain unprinted. He promised a woman that he would leave his wife, and then he promised his wife that he would never leave. Promises are a currency more volatile than any stock. Once, very late, a boy came in, the kind of boy who is called a young man in certain announcements. He was shaking in the elegant light. He knows, the boy said to the man with the moon phone. The man's eyes did a small, precise thing, like a surgeon's finger. He told the boy to breathe. He told him to say nothing to anyone. He told him to trust. He turned the phone around and tapped a FIA number and smiled at someone whose name began with Sir. The boy, shaking, did not stop. He stepped closer to me as if I were a chapel's corner where a sinner might put his forehead. How many men have died because of you? He asked. I did not answer. How many? He asked again. The man touched his shoulder, not comfort. Inventory, and the boy left his fingerprints on my glass. 10 ovals of grease, like the petals of a common flower. Later that week, the boy's apartment burned, and the fire department said the wiring had been proud and careless. Wires seldom hire lawyers. Do not mistake me. I do not kill on my own. But I have watched the way a man grows taller when his hand finds a hilt, the way he believes his reach is now the length of history. The billionaire. He had earned the title the way some men earn scars used, me as a mirror that flattered him. He posed beside me for photographs that appeared in magazines where adjectives are a form of tax evasion. He thought my silence was consent. Silence is often judgment in a better suit. The end of his empire did not look like an end. It looked like a fundraiser that had slightly too many policemen at it. It looked like a newspaper that ran out of ink exactly where his name should have been. It looked like an assistant who did not open a door quickly enough, and a wife who opened a door that led elsewhere. It looked like a small cough that became a diagnosis that became a myth. He died in a bed that had cost more than a cottage, watching a tree decide whether to lose its last leaf. He had money in countries that had no maps, and friends in rooms where the candles keep their own accounts. The will was read. The gallery was catalogued. The chapeled room became inventory. I was inventory. Museums are honest thieves. They steal only once and then keep perfect notes. The museum that bought me had white walls and an ocean of soft lighting. Visitors came with cameras that blinked red like small, eager eyes. Children pressed their faces to the glass. Couples argued about lunch while reading the plaque that guessed at my origins with scholarly confidence. Docents made jokes about if this sword could talk, and I, out of courtesy, remained polite. I was given a number, and the number was given a drawer in a database that would outlive many marriages. I learned the names of the guards' grandchildren, the rhythm of the janitor's mop, the way winter makes boots honest about where they have been. People stand before me and imagine battles. They rarely imagine kitchens. They think of kings and not of the man who fixed that king's bootstrap so it would not rub a blister on the long ride home. They imagine a destiny shaped like a crown. Destinies are more often shaped like a broom. Sometimes a veteran stands quietly for a long time and then salutes. Sometimes a child asks her father whether I am sharp, and the father says, "Not anymore," and for that afternoon he is wrong. Sometimes a young couple takes a photograph in which their smiles are not about me at all, and yet I am there, smuggled into the future like a rumor. Once a woman leaned very close and whispered to me the name of a man she had forgiven. She left her breath on the glass. The breath sighed and was gone. You want secrets? I have so many that they have learned to sit politely together. Here is one. When the young prince lay dying on the field, he was not thinking of his crown. He was thinking of a single fish he had caught as a boy and of the way it had flashed like a knife under green water. Here is another. The knight who carried me to war stole a loaf of bread from a hungry man in a church and then broke it into 3 parts and gave 2 of them back. Here is one from across the world. The warrior who wrote poems about rain did not believe he would be remembered. He believed only that the rain would continue. Here is one closer to now. The billionaire had, in a locked drawer, a letter he wrote to a son who never took his surname. The letter began with, "I was not made for kindness," and then it tried very hard to be kind. I do not judge, I have said, and it is not quite true. I judge in the way a tree judges, by continuing. I remain. I am carried through men's lives the way winter is carried through villages. I change faces. I learn the new rules of the old game. I shine when polished. I dull when neglected. I tell the truth badly, unless you already suspect it. I am not a kingmaker. I am a measure. If you want to know a man, put weight in his hand and watch which way he leans. It is fashionable now to ask whether objects have souls. The museum hosted a panel about it. Philosophers, physicists, a poet whose scarf could have doubled as a banner. They sat under lights that made their foreheads into separate countries. They spoke of agency and aura, of the way a thing carries, the thumbprint of its maker, of the way a crowd can feed its hunger into an object until the object seems to breathe. They did not invite me to speak. That was polite of them. If I had spoken, I might have said this: "You do not give us souls. You pour yours into us, and then are startled when we shine." The night guard sometimes turns off one row of lights before the other, and the gallery becomes a gray lake with a bright shore. In that half-world I can see, reflected faintly in my glass, the pillars of centuries behind me, like old trees standing in heavy snow. I think of the smith whose hands taught me to hold an edge. I think of the prince who died young enough to be beautiful forever. I think of the thief who laughed with a rotten tooth, of the knight who prayed with cracked lips, of the poet warrior who composed until death interrupted his line, of the Soviet soldier who held me like a promise he didn't dare say out loud, of the billionaire who mistook possession for protection. I think of the small girl who asked whether I was sharp and the father who was wrong for one afternoon. I think of the woman who whispered forgiveness into the glass. I am a poor box for prayers, but I hold them anyway. A curator once considered moving me to a different wall. He stood with a tablet and tilted his head and made a little hum, like a kettle that is almost ready to sing. "Narrative flow," he said to the other curator, and they spoke of the visitor's journey, of the desire line that draws a body through space and past history. They were not wrong. The body wants a story the way a mouth wants water. But stories also want bodies. They seek out hands and shoulders and sometimes, tragically, throats. This is not an accusation. It is simply gravity in a different dialect. When storms rattle the museum's windows, I remember ships. When summer presses its thumb against the glass, I remember armor that smelled like horses. When children laugh in the corridors, I remember campfires where men told jokes they would deny in daylight. When the alarm is tested on Tuesdays, I remember trumpets, and then I do not, for alarms are less honest than trumpets. Now and then, an academic writes to the museum with a theory about me, and sometimes the theory is handsome enough to wear for a season. I have been called royal, ceremonial, votive, decorative, bastard in the technical sense, continental, insular, migratory, crusaders, pirates, mercenaries, monks. I am none of these at all. I am the sum of the hands that have used me, minus the lies they told themselves. Do I miss blood? The way an old dancer might miss pain? Sometimes, in the thin hours, I imagine the weight and speed that once defined me, and I almost mistake momentum for meaning. But then a school group comes, and a boy with a cowlick says, very seriously, "That is so cool." And I remember that awe is also a use and cleaner. You who are listening, perhaps you hold a key, a phone, a cup. Perhaps you think it is yours. Perhaps it is. But one day someone will hold it after you, and the warmth of your hand will travel with it a little way into a different morning. Objects do not have souls. Souls have objects the way rivers have beds. We shape each other and call it history. As for the secrets you wanted here, is the secret that matters most. Each man who held me believed that I would make him larger. And for a time, I did. But in the end, I simply made him more clearly himself. The prince became a king by rumor and a boy by memory. The thief became a corpse with an anecdote. The night became a prayer wrapped in bandage. The poet became a poem no one can quote, but everyone can feel whenever rain rehearses on a lantern. The soldier became a quiet, old man whose grandchildren will think the wardrobe was always that full. The billionaire became a locked drawer that opens only in stories told late at night by men who count favors like coins. And I remain a length of sharpened history, a silent sentence ending in a point. If you come to the museum and stand before me, you will see your own face, small and wavery, floating on my blade. You might think that is a trick of the light. It is not. It is a trick of time. Everyone who has ever looked at me has left a little of their gaze behind. It is why I shine, even under soft bulbs. It is why I'm never quite dark, even when the guard has gone and the row of lights has finished, moving from shore to lake and back again. I am steel that remembers fire, water that remembers heat, silence that remembers words. I am a sword, and I have told you only the part of the story that can be born in a single night.